Matthew 5, 1 through 12 says, "Seeing the crowds, Jesus went up on the mountain, and when he sat down, his disciples came to him. And he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, 'Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you.'" Now this summer we're going to be studying the Beatitudes from the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5. And the reason they're called Beatitudes is pretty obvious, I think, as we read them. They're kind of like the golden rule, you know? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. You've heard that, right? Everybody's heard that. It's really good advice. The golden rule, it's taken from Luke 6:31, and it's something that Jesus actually said, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And so when it comes to how we treat one another, the world claims to want to take this advice from Jesus. But instead of saying, listen to Jesus, we just call it the golden rule. It's not a bad name for it. Just try not to forget who said it, right? The Beatitudes are similar in that way. At the very least, what we're going to be doing here is getting advice from Jesus on some attitudes we ought to have as Christians. But Lord willing, we're not just going to be getting advice. My prayer is that by the grace of God, he might work these words of Jesus into our hearts and bring our lives into submission to him so that we might be conformed to the image of Christ, that our hearts might be made to look like Jesus' heart, and so that in the end we'll see God. Because that's what's really at stake here, seeing God. That we'll be able to stand before his presence and be filled with overwhelming and abundant joy and happiness there. We're going to begin this new study by looking back towards the Armor of God study from this spring in order to see the contrast between what Jesus was saying in his sermon from what the people in his day were expecting their Messiah to look like. Now, I'll explain what I mean by Messiah in just a minute. First, we're going to read from Isaiah 59. And what I'm hoping you'll notice is that Jesus is being prophesied of in Isaiah 59, which was written about 700 years before Jesus was born. Isaiah 59 is going to talk about the one wearing the armor of God, just like we read about in the Armor of God study from Ephesians 6. We'll learn in Isaiah that the armored one is Jesus himself. And this is something I shared with you guys repeatedly, that to put on this armor of God is to have Jesus over you like armor, his righteous heart covering over your sinful heart, that faith he creates in you coming between you and the enemy weapons like a shield, all that stuff. And he can be all of that for you because all this armor that we read about here is the essence of who Christ is. Now listen to what the Lord said through Isaiah in chapter 59, starting in verse 14. "Justice is turned back, and righteousness stands far away. For truth has stumbled in the public squares, and uprightness cannot enter. Truth is lacking, and he who departs from evil makes himself a prey." Doesn't that sound like the day and age we live in? Amazing. "The Lord saw it, and it displeased him, and there was no justice. He saw that there was no man, and wondered that there was no one to intercede. Then his own arm brought him salvation, and his righteousness upheld him. He put on righteousness as a breastplate and a helmet of salvation on his head. He put on garments of vengeance for clothing and wrapped himself in zeal as a cloak. According to their deeds, so he will repay wrath to his adversaries, repayment to his enemies. To the coastlands he will render repayment. So they shall fear the name of the Lord from the west, and his glory from the rising of the sun, for which he will come like a rushing stream which the wind of the Lord drives. And a Redeemer will come to Zion, to those in Jacob who turn from transgression, declares the Lord. So here comes Jesus, the Messiah. Jesus is the one being spoken of in Isaiah 59:16. Then his own arm, God's own arm, brought him salvation. God says that there was no one who could represent his righteousness in the world because everyone who ever lived has fallen short of the glory of God. Because the intentions of every thought of the heart of everyone who ever lived was only evil continually. Because we sinned, and there was no one who could execute divine justice and uphold the honor of God. No one. So God did it himself. He sent Jesus, who exists as a representative of God's exact nature in human form. If you want to know what God is like, if you want to know what God would say, or if you want to know what God would do, then look to Jesus. But the people were expecting him to be a literal representation of the prophecy in Isaiah 59. They wanted their Messiah to be a warrior that would come and strike down the enemies of God, which, to them, as far as they were concerned, was anyone who wasn't a Jew. And the people in Jesus' day couldn't wait. They couldn't wait for this Messiah to come in and strike down the enemies of God. See, Messiah means deliverer. Remember from the Armor of God series? At that time, Greece and Rome were the world's superpowers. Every country in that part of the world had to pay tribute of some sort to Rome, if not even be governed directly by Rome. In other words, the Jews, God's chosen people who were supposed to be ruled by God himself, had been taken over by Greeks first and then Romans. And they were looking for someone to deliver them, to free them from the tyranny of Rome, to make Israel great again, kind of like Donald Trump. That was what they expected from their Messiah. It seems contradictory then, doesn't it, that God would declare Jesus coming as he did in Isaiah 59, only for Jesus to show up some 700 years later, seemingly saying the apparent opposite. Because what Jesus did when he preached the Sermon on the Mount, what he did in declaring these Beatitudes was trump every established principle that kings, governors, and religious leaders had set up for the last several hundred years. What Jesus was actually declaring was the heart and mind of God himself. And he could do that because he came to represent the very nature of God himself in human form. Now, the Beatitudes reflect the nature of God displayed in the person of Jesus Christ. And what God is showing us in Jesus and in Jesus' words in the Beatitudes is so incredibly kind. It's so incredibly gracious and humble. So we have to ask, what's with all this Isaiah 59 business then? If God's own arm would come with righteousness as a breastplate and with vengeance about himself as one wears clothes, all to drive out the enemies of God, then why is this guy Jesus talking about being poor in spirit? And why is he talking about crying with people and sharing their sorrow with them? That doesn't sound right. That's not right. Isaiah 59 says that this Messiah is going to repay his enemies with wrath, with terrible wrath like the rising sun as a rushing stream. This is our deliverer? Really? Jesus is our Messiah? Now, the more you study the Bible and come to know and love the things of God in your life, the more it'll come clear that what Jesus said in Matthew 5 was not a contradiction of the prophecy about a holy warrior, but that in his Sermon on the Mount, Jesus was declaring war on the real enemy. And had nothing to do with Greeks or Romans, nothing. Even though the people in Jesus' day thought it would have everything to do with the Romans. They hoped that it would. And in the end, they kind of demanded that it should have everything to do with the Romans, or they would reject him as the Messiah. And so they did. They rejected Jesus. You know, we do the same thing today. Everyone's looking for a Messiah of some sort. Everyone's looking for a Messiah to help us be everything we want to be, to give us the life we want to live, to get us the things we want to get, and to make us the kind of country that we think we want. It's sad. But for most of the world's population, a magic genie named Jesus is the only kind of Messiah we want. But like I said, for Jesus to preach these Beatitudes and then to go on and live as he lived and to die like he died and to come back to life and then send his Holy Spirit into his people, this was all Jesus totally being the kind of warrior king declared in Isaiah 59. Check this out. If anyone remembers anything about the armor of God that we studied, keep in mind that the kind of armor we talked about from Ephesians 6 is the same armor that the people in Jesus' day saw in Jesus. It's the same armor, except they were expecting literal armor. They were expecting a literal warrior king coming in a literal breastplate and a literal helmet with a literal shield, sword, and scepter to drive out a literal physical political enemy like Rome. When, as it turned out, the people in Jesus' day were face to face with spiritual reality itself. They were face to face with ultimate reality himself, existing in human form as the real and true armor of God, real, though not at all literal. The people in Jesus' day saw Jesus as a powerful, miracle-working wise man who would brandish weapons and clothing of vengeance and lead the Jewish people in a violent revolt against Rome. Because that's what they thought Isaiah 59 was saying. But Jesus coming into this world meant nothing of the sort. He didn't come to start a literal war or have anything to do with a literal war. Yet that armor that Jesus came into this world with, the weapon he came into this world as, is exactly the kind of warrior king Isaiah 59 was prophesying about. And this is what the Apostle Paul was writing about, having very much come to the realization of what Isaiah 59 was really talking about, because of who God revealed himself to be to the world, and to Paul's heart, and to my heart, and hopefully your heart through the all-satisfying person and victorious work of Jesus Christ. He came as a warrior king, all right, like we've been talking about for months now, a warrior king in a very different type of battle than we typically think of. Now, this new series is not going to focus on the imagery of the armor of God anymore. We already did that. But it's important to get the context of it in your head because of how radical Jesus' sermon here really is. You know, and it's easy to follow a conqueror. It's easy to follow someone who kicks butt and makes you proud to be associated with him. Why do you think the Nazis did what they did? All the horrible things that the Nazis did. Why do you think they did that? Because they were enamored with a victor. Hitler was a winner. It made sense to follow the winner, and that's why we here in North Dakota become Seahawks fans, or Broncos fans, or Cavalier fans, or Shark fans, Yankees, or whatever. We're drawn to the winners that our society celebrates. If Jesus had come to them in those days and stood up on the mountainside and said, "Death to Rome," every single Jew would have eagerly marched against Rome behind him, risking everything because of the thrill of being caught up in this campaign of this conquering king, Jesus, the conquering king presumably from Isaiah 59. But what Jesus actually said didn't sound to them like he had any interest in becoming a great conquering king at all. Because when it came to the kind of king that they were talking about, he just wasn't interested. He wasn't interested in being that kind of king. Yet what we come to know through studying God's Word and in knowing Jesus Christ, the Son of God, the eternal King of the universe, is that these 9 Beatitude statements in Matthew 5 are the exhortation of God, the call of God himself to his people, calling us to join Jesus in a spiritual war, to join him and to win. Listen to his words again in Matthew 5. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. So tonight I simply want to set the stage for the summer and make the connection to what we've been studying this spring. Now, starting next week and in the following weeks, we'll get into these Beatitudes, and we're going to see exactly what these statements mean for us.